What if God was never a person at all? Not a father in the sky, not a voice that commands, not a judge waiting for your sins. What if God was everything? The tree outside your window, the fire in your chest when you're in pain, the storm that breaks, the silence that follows, the scar that never heals? Would you still dare to call that God, or would you fear it? Because if God is everything, then He is not separate from you. Your darkness, your wounds, your failures, they are no less divine than the stars above you. This thought is not comforting. It is terrifying, because it strips away the safe image of God as someone who protects, who rewards, who punishes. It leaves you with something infinite, faceless, ungraspable, something that cannot be bargained with. For centuries, humanity has clung to the image of God as a ruler, a father, a lawgiver. That God can be pleased or angered. That God can be used to justify power, obedience, and fear. But then came a man who said, "No, God is not a king. God is not outside. God is not someone. God is everything." And those words were enough to destroy him. Because once you redefine God, you redefine power itself. Once you strip God of a throne, you strip men of their crowns. This man paid the price of exile, silence, and hatred. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and his vision was the forbidden heresy, the vision of the God who was banned.
What if everything you were taught about God was wrong? What if God was not a person at all, not a father, not a judge, not a ruler sitting above the clouds? What if God was everything? The trees you pass without noticing, the pain that keeps you awake at night, the silence between two heartbeats, the stone, the storm, the scar. Would you dare to believe it? Would you still call it God? And more importantly, would you risk everything, your family, your reputation, your safety, to defend such a vision? Baruch Spinoza did. And for that, he was banned. 17th century Amsterdam, a city alive with trade, with whispers of freedom, with the clash of old faiths and new philosophies. Inside a Jewish community that had already suffered exile and persecution, a young man dares to think differently. Not in the quiet, safe way most of us think differently today, but in a way that could, and did, cost him everything. In 1656, Spinoza was excommunicated. The herem, a curse of total exclusion, was pronounced against him in one of the harshest terms ever written. He was cut off not just from the synagogue, but from his family, his friends, his entire community. No one could speak to him. No one could do business with him. No one could even come close to him. Imagine the weight of that. Your entire life erased with a single sentence. Not because you committed a crime, not because you hurt anyone, but because you dared to say, God is not what you think he is. Spinoza's crime was not atheism. It was something far more dangerous. He did not deny God. He redefined him. And in doing so, he struck at the heart of every religion built on the image of a personal, punishing deity. He dared to see divinity, not in the heavens above, but in the substance of reality itself, in nature, in life, in the totality of existence. For those who wanted a God who rewards obedience and punishes rebellion, this was intolerable. For those who used fear of God as control, this was unforgivable. Spinoza's God was not a king on a throne. It was the river that cannot be stopped, the infinite substance out of which everything arises, the universe itself. The heresy of Spinoza was not that he rejected God, but that he made God unavoidable. He removed the distance. He stripped away the face, the voice, the commandments, and he said, "Look around you. You are already inside God." This is why his heresy was forbidden, because it doesn't just challenge theology, it challenges power. It asks, if God is nature, then who needs priests? If God is everything, then who has the right to tell you where he begins and ends? Ask yourself, if you had been born in his time, in his community, would you have had the courage to stand where he stood? Would you endure the silence of everyone you loved, the contempt of the crowd, the weight of exile, simply to remain true to a vision you could not deny? Spinoza did, and for that, to this day, his name is spoken with both reverence and suspicion. His was the vision of the banned God, not because it was false, but because it was too dangerous to be allowed. And yet, centuries later, the same vision still whispers to us. Whenever we feel awe before a sunset, whenever we sense meaning in suffering, whenever we stand in silence, unable to explain why life in its vastness feels like more than matter. That whisper is Spinoza's heresy. That whisper is the God who was banned.
In Amsterdam, 1656, silence became a weapon. With a single decree, the synagogue closed its doors on one of its brightest minds. Baruch Spinoza was 23 years old when his community turned against him, not with stones, not with fire, but with words carved in eternal damnation. The herem was pronounced, the curse of excommunication. The words still echo today. No one shall speak to him, no one shall write to him, no one shall show him kindness. He was cut off as if dead while still alive. Imagine what that meant in the 17th century. Your community was your survival. It was your name, your family, your livelihood. To lose it was to lose everything. Friends would cross the street to avoid you. Family would refuse to see your face. Your existence became a void. Why such violence? What could a young philosopher say that made the elders tremble with fear? Spinoza's words cut deeper than denial. He did not reject God. He dared to say, the God you worship does not exist. Not a father who rewards, not a judge who punishes, not a king on a throne above the clouds. Instead, he saw God as something infinite, faceless, without borders. God as the totality of all things. God as the very fabric of reality. This was not atheism. It was something far more threatening. Because if God is not a person, then he cannot be bribed with rituals. He cannot be flattered with prayers. He cannot be claimed by one religion, one book, one chosen people. For priests and leaders, this was unbearable, because their power rested on the idea of a God who commands, who chooses, who divides the worthy from the damned. Take that away, and what remains? Authority without foundation, fear without teeth. That is why Spinoza's thought was considered dangerous. Not because it erased God, but because it made God unavoidable. Every tree, every stone, every wound in your flesh became divine. No priest could claim to own it. No ritual could control it. Spinoza's vision collapsed the distance between heaven and earth. He said, you are already inside God. and that was enough to exile him. Think of the courage it takes to stand by such a thought. To wake up knowing that every voice, every door, every hand you once knew is gone. To carry the weight of being branded a heretic, forbidden even to be remembered by those who loved you. And yet he did not recant. He chose solitude over lies, truth over belonging. He chose exile rather than worship a God he did not believe in. This is the essence of Spinoza's heresy. Not a denial, but a transformation. Not the absence of God, but the God of presence. Not a throne in the sky, but the substance of reality itself. And for this, he was silenced. But ideas cannot be buried forever. They seep through the cracks of history, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. Centuries later, Albert Einstein would be asked if he believed in God, and he answered, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists." The forbidden heresy of 1656 became the quiet faith of one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. What once was exile became inspiration. What once was fear became freedom. But for Spinoza, in his time, it meant walking alone into the wilderness of thought. A man exiled not from land, but from belonging itself. A man who discovered that the cost of seeing truth is often to be left unseen.
To call Spinoza a heretic was easy. To understand what he actually saw, that was far harder. Because Spinoza was not simply replacing one image of God with another. He was tearing down the very framework by which humanity had understood divinity for millennia. For most of history, God was imagined as a person, a voice that speaks, a will that commands, a mind that judges, sometimes merciful, sometimes furious, but always someone. Someone above us, outside us, beyond us. Spinoza shattered that. He looked at the universe and refused to see a king. Instead, he saw an infinite substance, without beginning, without end, without outside. He saw everything, nature, existence, reality itself, as God. Not a God who created the world, but a God who is the world. Not a craftsman standing apart from his work, but the work itself in its endless unfolding. This was not poetry, it was philosophy, rigorous, precise, terrifying in its clarity. He called it Deus sive natura, God or nature. Not two things, but one and the same. Think of what this means. The storm that destroys your home? God. The laughter of a child? God. The rise and fall of empires? God. The loneliness that gnaws at you in the night? God. If everything is God, then nothing is outside him. If everything is divine, then even your suffering is not an accident, but an expression of the infinite. This is not the comfort of a father who listens to your prayers. It is the abyss of a universe that does not bend to your will. A universe that simply is, and in being, is sacred. No wonder people called it heresy. Because if this is true, then the God of fear collapses. The God of rules becomes unnecessary. The God who chooses one nation, one church, one book, dissolves into the air. What remains is something larger and smaller all at once. Larger because it embraces everything. Smaller because it offers no special treatment, no chosen people, no guarantees. This vision was not safe. It stripped humanity of illusions. It demanded that we face reality not as a battlefield between good and evil, but as an infinite whole where both exist as necessary parts. Spinoza was accused of coldness, of emptiness, of reducing God to mere matter. But nothing could be further from the truth. For Spinoza, to call the universe God was not to strip it of meaning. It was to restore its meaning everywhere. It was to make every moment, every being, every thought a sacred revelation. Centuries later, Albert Einstein would echo this vision. When asked if he believed in God, he said, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of what exists." For Einstein, as for Spinoza, divinity was not a person who intervenes, but the elegance of natural law itself, the quiet perfection of the cosmos, the mystery that cannot be prayed away, but only encountered with awe. And for us, today, the question remains as sharp as ever. Because if Spinoza is right, then God is not somewhere else waiting to be found. God is already here, in the dust on your bookshelf, in the ache in your chest, in the hand you cannot let go of. This was Spinoza's revolution, not to abolish God, but to reveal him everywhere, not to comfort us, but to awaken us, not to promise salvation, but to confront us with the sacred reality we cannot escape. The god of fear was banned. The god of nature was born. And once you see him, you cannot unsee.
Philosophy is never just about ideas. It is about how we live, how we suffer, how we die. And Spinoza's God, if we dare to take him seriously, changes everything about how we face those realities. Because if God is everything, then nothing is meaningless. Not your pain, not your loss, not even your failure. Think about what that means. When you suffer, you usually ask, why me? Why this? Why now? You look for reasons, for punishments, for hidden lessons. Religion often answers with guilt. You were tested, you sinned, you must repent. Atheism often answers with despair. It means nothing at all. Spinoza's vision cuts through both. It says your suffering is not punishment. It is not meaningless either. It is simply part of the infinite fabric. Not outside God, not against God, but God himself expressed through you. This is not easy to accept. It demands more courage than believing in a protective father in the sky, because it means you cannot escape the truth of your wound. You cannot pray it away, you cannot deny it, you cannot bargain with it. But you can see it differently. You can see it as necessary. Not good, not bad, but necessary. The same necessity that brings the sun to rise, the rivers to flow, the leaves to fall. Your wound is part of that same order, the same God, the same nature. And once you see it that way, something shifts. The wound stops being just a burden. It becomes a portal. A place where you meet reality as it is, not as you wished it to be. Spinoza himself lived this truth. Exiled, cut off, alone. He did not collapse into bitterness. He devoted his life to clarity, to writing, to working quietly as a lens grinder, polishing glass while polishing thought. His philosophy was not abstract comfort. It was survival. It was how he endured the silence of abandonment. And isn't that what we all long for? Not empty promises, not false hopes, but a way to endure what we cannot change. Spinoza's God does not rescue you from reality. He reveals reality as divine. Even in the nights you cannot sleep. Even in the tears that do not end. Even in the loneliness that threatens to break you. To live with Spinoza's God is to live without excuses. To face life without demanding that it should be otherwise. to accept that you are not a mistake in the universe, but a necessary expression of it. This acceptance is not resignation, it is power. Because once you stop resisting what is, you stop being crushed by it. You begin to move with it, like a wave with the tide, like a flame with the air. So ask yourself, if everything is God, can you see your pain as sacred? If everything is God, can you stop running from your wound and look at it as part of the infinite? If everything is God, what does it mean to live, to lose, to die? Spinoza's heresy was forbidden, not just because it threatened religion, but because it stripped away the comfort of fantasy and left only the raw, unfiltered truth. And yet, in that truth, there is a strange kind of freedom. Not freedom from suffering, but freedom from despair. The wound does not vanish, but it no longer feels like exile. It feels like belonging. Because if everything is God, then even the wound is holy.
Spinoza never asked you to believe. He asked you to see. Not to kneel before a throne, not to memorize commandments, not to beg for salvation, but to open your eyes to what is already here, to the fact that you are not outside God, not separate, not excluded, even in exile. The world called him a heretic. They silenced his voice, erased his name, cursed his memory. And yet, his thought survived, whispering through centuries, returning like water through cracks in stone. Because truth is difficult to kill. You can ban a man, you can erase his name from the rolls of the synagogue, you can cast him into silence. But you cannot bury a vision that reveals the sacred in everything. This is what makes Spinoza's heresy still dangerous today. Because if he is right, then no one owns God. No one can stand above you claiming to speak for him. No institution, no priest, no ideology. If he is right, then the sacred is not locked in temples or books. It is in the dust under your bed, in the stranger you ignore on the street, in the wound you carry in silence. And that means freedom. But freedom is terrifying, because it strips you of excuses. There is no one to blame, no one to bargain with, no one to guarantee meaning. Only reality, infinite, faceless, unavoidable. Most of us are not ready for this. We prefer the comfort of illusions, the idea of a God who watches us, punishes our enemies, rewards our loyalty. It feels safer. It feels easier. It feels human. Spinoza offered something less human, but more divine. A God who does not comfort, but confronts. A God who cannot be bribed or bent, but who is revealed in everything, even in what breaks you. This is why his God was banned, because the forbidden is often the truest, because the heresy that survives exile is often the wisdom that outlives empires. And now, centuries later, the question is no longer about Spinoza. It is about you. Do you still cling to the God of fear? Do you still live as if divinity were far away, waiting to judge or save you? Or can you see the possibility that the wound itself is holy, that the silence you fear is also divine, that your exile is not from God, but into Him? Spinoza was exiled for telling the truth. He was cursed, forgotten, erased. But he never recanted. He lived quietly, grinding glass lenses, writing words that would one day fracture the illusions of an entire world. And you, what illusions are you still afraid to break? What gods do you cling to, not because they are true, but because they are safe? The wound is where this question begins, not where you are healed, but where you are stripped of everything false, not where you escape, but where you wake up. Spinoza's heresy was forbidden because it was dangerous. But the truth is always dangerous before it sets you free. So ask yourself, do you still live under the shadow of the God they taught you to fear? Or are you ready to face the God who was banned, the God who is everything?
If this moved something inside you, stay. We're building something for those who don't fake it. Subscribe not just for the content, but for the confrontation. And if this left a wound, maybe it was meant to. Sometimes the best way to go deeper is to share the pain. Share it. Someone out there still believes God is a judge, still calls fear faith, still thinks obedience is holiness. This won't give them certainty, but it might show why they never find freedom. Let this reach the ones still mistaking exile for abandonment. Let it remind them you were never cast out of God. You were always inside Him.